Coming up next on Twitch, This Week in Computer Hardware, Intel's new X79 motherboards. Geez, that's a lot of pins. Ultrabook update. Might want to wait for Ivy Bridge. Lucid high performance. AMD tops 8 gigahertz SD card speeds, 28-inch monitors, and more. It's all coming up next on Twitch.
Netcasts you love.
From people you trust.
This is Twitch.
Bandwidth for Twitch is provided by Cachefly at CACHEFLY.com.
This is Twitch, This Week in Computer Hardware, episode 137, recorded September 15th, 2011. X79 motherboard, hands-on. Look at all those pins.
This episode of This Week in Computer Hardware is brought to you by Netflix. Watch thousands of TV episodes and movies on your PC, Mac, iPad, iPhone, or TV instantly. All streamed directly to you, saving you time, money, and hassle. For your free 30-day trial, go to netflix.com/twit.
Welcome to This Week in Computer Hardware. I'm Patrick Norton, joined as always by the man, the myth, the benchmarking legend.
I give lessons sometimes.
You give lessons too.
Yeah,
he does lessons too. He schools people in first-person shooters.
Nice.
His name is Ryan Shrout. You can find him normally at PC Per, or the PC Per podcast, but once a week we spring him from his cage. Actually, you are pretty far sprung from your cage. Not Taiwan or
Nope.
the United Arab Emirates. But we are both in Petaluma at the same time for the second time.
That's true. I guess for people who are listening audio form only, we need to inform them of that.
Just so you know.
Yeah. We are sitting in the same location, so if you see better or worse interaction, now you know why.
If you notice that we're all talking 200 milliseconds tighter on every sentence, it's because we're in the same room for a change. Windows 8 was released this week. Who cares? Yep. We're a hardware podcast. Let's talk about IDF. Intel Developer Forum, the annual event where Intel tries to control the destiny of the PC platform, which was actually kind of weird because all of a sudden Intel's like, we're making phones now. If Windows can be on ARM.
Yeah, but they've said that for 3 years, which is the interesting
But apparently they were actually running around in dark rooms with phones this year.
They were. So I think they're working off the Medfield platform now. I still think they're 1 or 2 generations away from really being able to properly address the mobile market with something that is competitive with Tegra or Qualcomm's parts or something like that.
One of the stories we were talking about on Techzilla last week was that this week, is that there are 2 billion people on the internet right now, 2.7 billion projected by 2015, and the vast majority of users are going to be accessing the internet on mobile, which is why, we talked about NVIDIA saying that ARM processors are taking over the universe, and Intel's starting to actually, I think, sweat that at this point.
I think they were sweating it a couple of years ago.
Right.
They may not have told us or wanted to admit that that's the case, but it's pretty much, without a doubt, definitely what's happening there.
No, GeoMeek, the PC is not dead. It is just being threatened.
Yeah. So we've got a lot of IDF news there to discuss and talk about. But I think the first thing we wanted to kind of play with here and show you guys is so one of the things they were showing off at IDF is the X79 platform, otherwise known as, start with that one, Sandy Bridge E platform. E standing for enthusiast in that case. Okay, I'll hold off. I get so excited. I know, it's toys.
It's shiny, and it's got a lot of pins.
This is a platform that's going to be out this year. It is the same Sandy Bridge architecture that you're used to, no graphics. It's going to have quad-channel memory controllers, which will be painfully obvious when you see the motherboards that come out for it. So this is kind of, the X58 chipset and platform have been around for a while. They're pretty long in the tooth.
The 68's been around for a while at this point.
Well, there was never a 68. There was a 67, and then there was a Z68. The Z68 didn't come out until Computex, so June. So it hasn't been that long. Remember, Sandy Bridge didn't get released until January. So this is kind of like supposed to be, I haven't tested it and actually run a lot of benchmarks yet, but it's supposed to be the replacement for X58 enthusiast level platform. So you can finally get rid of those Core i7 920s that everybody...
I'm not getting rid of my... Do you know what I paid for my Core i7 920? I'm getting another 3 years out of that thing.
So MSI was nice enough to let me steal this motherboard, which is an example of an X79 platform. And first thing you'll notice is that the processor socket is pretty large. It's huge. Big. Takes up a lot of space. And I know you're very excited about showing the pen count.
We can reveal that slowly. Well,
so other kind of obvious things that show up here, DIMMs, 8 DIMM slots. Now, not all of these X79 motherboards are going to come with 8 DIMM slots. Probably a majority of them are going to ship with 4, 2 on this side, 2 on that side. Quad-channel memory controller means you'll have to fill all 4 slots to get the most performance out of the system. And I know we get that question a lot. Is a 3-channel better than a 2-channel? How much benefit do you get? And we always say it's not really that much different. I think that will be the case here as well. I think you'll see some select few applications, heavy video editing, something like that, takes advantage of 4 channels, but I don't think it'll be world-ending for gamers or anything like that.
It's kind of funny. There's 8 SATA connectors, buried on this motherboard.
Yep.
Really, the Intel ones are primarily going to have 4.
There should be more SATA 6G ports on this chipset than on the previous one as well, although that hasn't been 100% confirmed either. We're still trying to decide if that's going to be the case. Oh, whose did?
That's why I was scooching over away from the clock, because I didn't want to lean on the monitor switch. But I was talking to Lloyd Case yesterday, and he was like, we're not sure if 2011 was the pin count on this or the year of release. This is the most ridiculously dense CPU socket I have ever seen. All of those little twitches you're seeing in the monitor right now in your home is a pin. It is ridiculous. It is like grains of sand on a beach.
The 2011 is in fact a pin count. Keep in mind, so Sandy Bridge currently runs in 1156 or 1155.
This is a huge... Why did they need this many pins?
So, going from a dual channel to a quad channel memory controller, you have to double your pin count for that, right? For whatever pin outs you have in actual connecting to the memory. And then this also allows for more DIMM slots to be installed that way as well. It's also to support more PCI Express channels as well. You'll notice on the board that there are lots of PCI Express ports. There's going to be more than enough for 3-way SLI, 3-way Crossfire, without having to use any kind of splitter connections or anything like that. So, these 3 with these new kind of PCI Express connections are PCIe 3.0 as well. So it's PCI Express 3.0 coming from this processor on this motherboard with graphics cards support it.
It's going to be interesting to see the CPUs for these when they come out, because they're going to have that sort of, the little brass circle surrounded by green substrate, and there's going to be, it's going to be just I can't imagine what the production on that CPU is going to be like.
It should be pretty interesting. So, you notice the 8 DIMM slots on it, and what's kind of interesting about that is not a lot of people need to use 8 DIMM slots necessarily, but memory's pretty cheap now. You can get 32 gigs of memory, 4 gigabyte modules for maybe $200, $210. And I saw some interesting applications of that, such as doing things using RAM disks. Maybe you only allocate 12 gigs for your system, and you have 20 gigs left over for a RAM disk.
How long before we boot into a RAM disk? A gigantic 128 gigabyte RAM
Well, you
disk.
can't do that because it's volatile memory.
That's true.
So what they do is you write the RAM disk to the hard drive every time you shut down or restart the machine. So there's a little bit of slowdown in that. But in terms of
I meant
bandwidth,
boot the system and then write the OS to the RAM disk.
Oh, I think that's completely possible.
That's
I'd
interesting.
like to see it.
Will that undermine SSD sort of growth if that happens, do you think?
No, I don't think so, because there's always going to be a little bit of questionable data integrity, right? You really want to trust your OS and all of your settings and all that kind of stuff to a RAM disk that may or may not boot, and then if you boot it to an SSD, it's kind of missing the whole point.
Double pain
from
points.
an SSD.
I was kind of surprised that Intel was generating a. I'm going to move this before one of us scrapes the table. And we're
that's
both
fine.
banned for life from the studio.
Yeah, we don't want to do that.
Intel was actually running a PC on like a single solar cell, or was it a big panel?
It wasn't a PC. It was only the processor. This was an interesting kind of demonstration. They actually demoed it 2 different days, and they gave different amounts of detail based on it. So what they did was the whole focus, we were talking about cell phones and Intel getting into that market, is power efficiency, not necessarily performance or even power per watt. It's power efficiency. It is performance per watt. It's how much performance can you get for the lowest amount of usage, voltage, and that type of stuff. So there's an interesting, not a theory, there's an interesting property of transistors and processors called the threshold voltage. And it is the voltage at which the lowest voltage transistors can actually function at. So what you'll see is, this is kind of a demonstration of a different platform, but it's a good kind of visualization of what threshold voltage actually is. It compares gate voltage to what is required to run it. And if you can make a transistor, which is what Intel's hopefully done with the 22 nanometer process,
right?
You make a transistor that has a very, very, very low threshold voltage, which means you can run it at slow speeds at low power, but also at high speeds at higher power. That gives them the flexibility to make a part for high-end notebooks or desktops, and also eventually to make parts for cell phones. And that's what the Haswell architecture is going to be. Now, this actually one that they showed doing that was a demonstration of what you can do with ultra-low voltage types of things. The processor is actually not a Haswell. It's based on a Pentium architecture. And they built a processor that's based off, powered by like a little solar cell. I don't know how big it is, a few inches by a few inches.
Right.
And you know, they had it up and running Windows XP. I think it was an older version of Windows. I don't think it was Windows 7.
But I'm not sure. Did you write the article on this one?
Yes.
Because you were saying you're based on the graph they gave.
Right.
Your guess was that they were running around somewhere between 1 and 2/10 of the volt.
Yes, they never they still, even today, they never specified exactly what it was. They said they were running within 100 millivolts of, or within 100, I think within 100 millivolts of the threshold voltage.
Wow.
So it's impressive, and this is the technology that Intel hopes is going to allow them to have one architecture. They don't like having Atom, which is considered lower power, lower performance, lower grade, and then having Sandy Bridge. This will allow them to have the same architecture all the way across their product line, in theory. And it's just cool to see a processor running off of a tiny little solar panel. Even though it was a Pentium. They told a story today, I don't know how much I believe them, that they couldn't find any Pentium motherboards anymore. So they had to like look on eBay for
That's funny.
Pentium motherboard, so they could actually get this demo up and running and see if they could get all that operating.
I can believe
that.
I'm actually surprised, though, the Asus UX21 Ultrabook, you say, quote, "It is still sexy. I still want it." Don't you want to wait for Ivy Bridge?
No, I don't like to wait for things, really. So Ivy
you
Bridge,
are immediate gratification on a stick, and I'm saying this is the guy who walked out of a computer store with 12 terabytes of hard drive because they were on sale. So you know,
I have a little bit of restraint, but not a lot, I guess. When you get your hands on these, they look like that.
It's like
and they feel like that, but they run Windows and.
Oh, I can run Windows on this.
So, and they're going to be less expensive. They're going to be less expensive. Otherwise, nobody's going to buy them.
Yeah. This is my work computer.
Yeah, I know. I understand.
It was free to me. I just have to live in the office.
That helps. That helps. So, I saw the UX21 at Computex.
Right.
But I didn't really get hands-on time with it. Didn't get to play around with it. Didn't get to see it, and it's just a sexy machine. It is like a MacBook Air, and everybody had those. Lenovo had some, Acer had some. They were all on display, and the goal is sub $999 still.
So UX21 shipping this month, or will it be later this year?
It will probably be October.
Okay.
It'll be before the holiday season. And you were asking about should we wait for Ivy Bridge? The issue with that is Ivy Bridge is not launched. Obviously, it's probably not even going to.
We're looking at
till January, February type time frame, and then by the time you get that into notebook designs, especially Ultrabook notebook designs, I think it'll be even further out. So
Ivy Bridge is the follow-up to Sandy Bridge for mobile parts. It's on the 22 nanometer process, has a vastly improved graphics section. What else is going on with Ivy Bridge?
So the graphics is the most important part of it. They've done major work revamping the graphics performance. They say that you can get twice as much GPU performance at the same power, or the same GPU performance at half of the power. So that's applicable to desktops in one way, and mobile machines and Ultrabooks in the other way. So that's pretty cool. They also have, I think we've talked about on the drive up here, the pseudo random number generator in there, which is going to be pretty important for security reasons.
Well, that's something also Intel, they first started talking about a year ago, and they've had random number generators on chips before, but in this case it's going to be digital, which means it's going to have lower power consumption. They're looking at sort of superior generation of random numbers, which if you're doing you know, that's actually something that Lloyd Case was saying yesterday when we were talking about it, is the idea of basically being able to run AES encryption to your hard drive with no penalty on the CPU in real time.
Yeah.
Which gets my little feral computing security panic into a level of, yeah, I'm just like, oh, that'll be awesome.
And there are other little tweaks. They were talking about the new sleep state technology that they have. So one of those interesting little quirks that you probably would never have thought of otherwise is you've got 4 cores on your system, and cores 0 through 3, maybe cores 2 or 3 are doing something. They're active and they're awake, but core 0 goes to sleep. Well, all the interrupts from the rest of the machine, PCI Express, any USB devices, keyboard, mouse inputs, those all go, they just defaulted going to core 0.
Right.
So if core 0 was asleep, it woke up core 0, it read the interrupt, it maybe passed on the work, maybe it kept the work for itself, but then it went back to sleep. And you know, if you look at the polling rates of USB or something like that, maybe that's 60 times a second, 100 times a second, whatever it is, that's how many times the core was going, you know, awake, asleep, for basically no purpose. And
anything for me to do? Anything for me to do? Anything for me to do?
Exactly. So in theory, this will improve battery life somewhat as well.
That's a good thing. Lucid high-performance technology improves game responsiveness. What is Lucid and why is it high performance?
Wow. So Lucid, Lucid is the company that made Hydra, which was the attempt to combine ATI and NVIDIA graphics cards into a single rendering pipeline, and then you'd be able to combine those for the performance in games. It didn't really pan out. It worked sometimes. It worked on some games. It wasn't as universal as they wanted it to be, and it didn't have the gains that we expected or were told we would expect.
Right.
They had much, much more success with the Lucid Virtue technology, which allows you to use a Sandy Bridge CPU with a discrete graphics card and still take advantage of the integrated graphics on the Sandy Bridge processor. So you could still use QuickSync technology.
Right.
You could still do that super fast transcoding stuff. So they were successful there. They eventually applied that to the AMD platforms as well, although there's not a killer feature on AMD's APUs that a discrete graphics card can't do as well.
Right.
So this hyperformance, which is the word hyper, H-Y-P-E-R, the word formance, which is not a word as far as I can remember. So it's a play on words of high performance, right?
Right.
So the goal of it is to improve gaming responsiveness, not game performance, not frame rates, although that is a byproduct of what they're doing. It's a very complicated topic, and without fancy diagrams that I haven't drawn or stolen from somebody yet, it's very hard to explain. So imagine your screen refreshes at 60 frames, right? So if we're looking at the image on Patrick's laptop here, you'll see on the left you've got 2 frames, on the right you've got 3 frames.
Right.
This is on your standard 60 hertz display. If you're running over 60 frames per second, and you don't have VSync on, you are running more than 1 frame on your screen at any given time. And so what they attempt to do is take frames N-1 and N+1. You know, look at those and they evaluate and they look for redundant rendering tasks, and they try to discover which of those tasks can be removed, and which of those, thereby, like how much of a percentage of this frame that's going to be drawn is actually identical to the frame above it. And if it's possible, they remove it.
Oh,
they take that frame out of the pipeline. The GPU sees a 0 frame time for rendering, or rather the game sees that, right? And what Lucid's little in-between driver does is it takes that little smaller frame out of the picture and shows you the next frame after it. So instead, what you're left with, where they get the idea of it improving user responsiveness, is that your screen refresh is always showing the most possible up-to-date frame.
Right.
It's not showing the in-between frames that may not have new information on them.
So that's
that your mouse and your keyboard reactions are ahead of where they would be otherwise.
So basically, they are taking advantage of the screen buffer to keep things the same until they change. I mean, it's a weird, like
it's a really, really complex software algorithm.
I'm looking at the math on this, and it's like, you know, frame rate without high performance, 347.55. Frame rate with high performance, 524.38. It's like, what's generating that
So first
number?
of all, I told them they're using Devil May Cry 4 as their benchmark there, and I said, look, guys, you cannot use this 2006 game anymore for your benchmarks because you get default frame rates of 347 frames per second. So the difference there is significant, but it's not real. Like you're not seeing twice as many frames. You're actually seeing less frames than you're seeing before. So, you know, this is something I told them when I met with them. I was like, you cannot present the information this way. You can't tell people you're doubling frame rate. But what they're trying to say is you are getting the responsiveness of a 500 frame rate machine while it's running at the normal, you know,
well, it's running at these
machine.
60 or 70 hertz that your monitor
So if your game would normally run at 60 frames per second, maybe with high performance enabled, it reports 80 or 90. But you're supposed to be getting the responsiveness of the 90 frames per second, even though your GPU can only spit out 60. So, like I said, I just got a little demo of it, and we still need some time to play around with it.
We'll see.
It's interesting. You know, and I see some people in the comments from 60 frames per second is good enough. 60 frames per second is good enough most of the time. It all depends on how in sync your display and the game is, right? So most people should probably play with virtual sync or VSync on, right? But if you want the most performance out of your machine, you turn VSync off. Sometimes that leads to other little hiccups where you get the tearing and all those types of things. So they're trying to address all of that as well. So it's, I think it has a lot of potential, but
it's an interesting concept.
It is an interesting concept, to say the least.
I don't know if we'll feel it when we play the game, but we will find out.
I told them they needed to get like professional gamers, which I am not, obviously. Right. People who play first-person shooters for a living and play them on this and play it on that, right? And they're the people that are going to be able to tell if there's a responsiveness difference in the game.
There's an interesting sort of A/B kind of blind taste test you could do with that, where you
exactly.
We've substituted the GPUs used by these gamers.
Do the Pepsi challenge on that.
AMD Bulldozer processor hits 8.429 gigahertz. It is a new world's record. This actually took place last week. The miracle of liquid nitrogen and
liquid helium,
which is much more terrifying than liquid nitrogen to me.
Between -220 and 230 C.
They managed to. How long do we know how long the CPU is running at 8.4
Just long
gigahertz?
enough to take a screenshot. I mean, that's basically what I mean. They were very upfront about it. They said we're not going to run benchmarks. Our goal is to get the highest frequency possible, and that's. You know, there's a culture of the overclocking community that wants to do that. And what's interesting is if you go look at the hardware frequency rankings, like the first 3 pages are all Intel Celeron or Pentium 4, like the newer Pentium brand of stuff.
Simple processors, easier to overclock in the extreme sense of the word.
That is exactly
Fewer
correct.
transistors, fewer failure points.
Now, what they did with this bulldozer is they only had 1 core enabled.
Oh, really?
Right. So they're just pushing frequency through
this.
Does
that
count?
Does that really count?
It counts.
Okay.
I mean, I don't know. I guess it counts. They claimed it. The Guinness Book of World Records awarded them the highest frequency processor.
Oh, well, congratulations
there was like
to them.
they had an event during IDF in downtown San Francisco to award them.
I love the fact that they're storing liquid nitrogen in Stanley thermoses.
No, that is liquid nitrogen in there.
Yeah.
The liquid helium was in like this giant vat, and the only way there was special tubing, and you basically had to create a sealed loop on that.
Yeah,
they're very blasé about liquid nitrogen. That's just every day.
You get blasé after a while.
I mean, they're just kind of pouring it in. Some of it spills, whatever.
Well, it vaporizes.
It does. Some people. It's funny. A lot of the comments on our story on that post were about. They weren't wearing gloves. They weren't wearing goggles.
You do not. Okay, goggles are a good idea with liquid nitrogen. I've been taken aside by actual professional scientists and told that because I at one point I've been using gloves and they're like, you never use gauntlets. You never use gloves when you're pouring liquid nitrogen, because if you pour liquid nitrogen on yourself, it'll run off. But if you pour it in, if it gets inside of your glove, it gets trapped at the end of the fingers, and then it freezes your fingertip solid.
That's not a good idea.
And so they're more concerned about creating points where you can actually trap the liquid nitrogen and for it to get caught in like the top, between your leg and the top of your boot or in the bottom of your glove. So I was told in very specific firms, do not use gloves when you're pouring liquid nitrogen, which is a little scary because you're sitting there, all you can think of is the rose smashing or the banana smashing demo in junior high school.
Right.
So if this is not exciting, and I don't know why it wouldn't be exciting, but if you're thinking right about now, I could use some entertainment. Maybe it's 2 in the morning. You're just about done with the podcast. You're looking for amusement, and you have a choice. You can go to the Redbox store down at the 7-Eleven. It's like a 5-mile drive. It's painful. It's traumatic. You're probably going to get mocked by some teenager with a pack of cigarettes and an attitude, or Or you could have just joined Netflix, one of our sponsors.
Those very specific examples. I like that. I like that. Yes, this episode of This Week in Computer Hardware is brought to you by Netflix. Netflix will stream thousands of TV episodes and movies directly to you instantly, which, as Patrick just properly demonstrated, will save you time, money, and hassle. That hassle being those teenagers with the cigarettes. You can watch Netflix movies and TV shows easily on your Mac, your PC, your iPad, even your iPhone or your Android phone. Some of the Android phones will support that application as well. If you have a gaming console like a Xbox 360, PS3, or Nintendo Wii, those all have the capability to do that as well. And if you're not a gamer, you don't have a console, you don't like the hassle of maybe hooking it up to your iPad or something like that, which it really is not. You can still use an Apple TV or a Roku if you have one of those handy as well. With those shows, or with that service, you can watch movies and TV shows instantly wherever you are, wherever you have internet access. And you can begin watching a movie or show on one device and finish it on another one, which means you can move from room to room, move from one, you're watching some movie at the office when you shouldn't be, then go home, finish it up there. That all works pretty well. Whichever way you choose to access Netflix, you can watch as many movies and TV shows as many times as you want, repeat as many times as you want. Which Patrick does a lot as well.
I think I've watched Downton Abbey like 3 times in succession.
Yeah.
Actually, the best thing is if you have a small child and they want to watch the same program over and over again.
I hear that happens a lot.
It happens a lot. And I've heard of people racking up fantastic monthly bills off of certain services that charge you a la carte every time you watch the program after 24 hours is up. Netflix, no pain there. One low monthly price.
That's very nice. And you can cancel anytime if you want to, if you're not satisfied. So that's good to know, right? You're not trapped in a contract or anything like that. But I think you can really enjoy the service. Try Netflix today, though, for 30 days free, even if it's 2 in the morning. All you have to do is go to netflix.com/twit. Sign up for your free trial there. We ask you to use that URL. Helps us, helps you. Netflix.com/twit. We thank Netflix for their support of This Week in Computer Hardware, and we hope you enjoy watching instantly with Netflix.
I'd like to give a quick shout out to the chat room and to tell them that, yes, cow sickles sound wonderful, but please don't ever mention cow on a stick again. Cow on a stick with A1 coating just when you thought it couldn't get any weirder.
Yeah, that's kind of weird.
Oh, my goodness.
So we
cow
jump
on
into
a
some
stick
emails?
wrapped in bacon. Let's wrap.
Everything is good wrapped in bacon, though.
My buddy Robert emails it, yes, even cow on a stick. Robert emails, it could all be my imagination, but my recently acquired Asus GTX 570 seems especially zippy and cool and quiet. This feeling could very well stem from 6+ months of dealing with a fantastically crappy, defective graphics card that induced the occasional blue screen of death, which, by the way, is going away in Windows 8. Is anyone aware of any secret sauce when pairing, say, an Asus graphics card with an Asus motherboard, as in my case? It's been a while since I've rolled NVIDIA, and I'm totally happy with the 570 so far. Robert, and it was kind of funny. There is no secret sauce, right? Design cycles are super short. 98% of a GPU design is coming straight from NVIDIA or AMD to the GPU manufacturer. 85, 90% of the motherboard design is coming from Intel or AMD to the manufacturer. They're choosing capacitors. They're maybe playing around with parts layout. They're certainly doing a lot in terms of the design of the cooler on the GPU.
Yep.
But the design cycles are so short, and the amount of money they can make off a card is so tight. They have no time to create secret sauce between like an Asus card and an Asus motherboard. I think in this particular case, I'm familiar with Robert's card. He had a card with a defective heatsink application. So the GPU overheated, and then he replaced, he pulled the cooler off and found like 4 pounds of thermal compound. Like literally like somebody just
seems like a good idea.
And squeezed a giant pile of thermal compound on the assembly line. And the card never ran right.
Yeah, there's nothing they're doing any different, right? They're all kind of meeting PCI Express specifications. There were a couple of exceptions years ago when dual GPU cards were first starting, and SLI and Crossfire were first starting, where an Asus, custom-made dual GPU graphics card would actually work better with their motherboard or actually function at all with their motherboard and not with some of their competitors' boards. That was more implementation side of the motherboard and how they, were first starting out with this technology. So today there's nothing different from board to board with card to card.
There's just not enough margin to be made. No. And truthfully, there are occasional bad cards, don't get me wrong. Horrible things happen to innocent people, but NVIDIA or AMD or NVIDIA, the market's so small at this point for aftermarket cards, neither NVIDIA or AMD can afford a bad customer experience, and if a card vendor's doing bad, they're going to beat him with a stick. It's just, in this particular case, he just got, a Friday GPU.
Right. We got an email here from Steven about external SATA, eSATA, on a notebook, which is one of the places where it would make really good sense. He says, I have an external 500 gig eSATA hard drive. I'm using it to back up my Dell Inspiron M5030 notebook. I would love to take advantage of the eSATA connectivity available on the external hard drive. It's available on the external drive already, so I could speed up my backups. Unfortunately, the notebook doesn't have an eSATA port on it. Is there any adapter that could allow me to add eSATA to the laptop? Otherwise, I'm forced to use the outdated USB 2.0 connection for backup. Thank you so much for the great work you guys do, and I love the show. Thank you, Steven. So it is a feature that, unfortunately, not a lot of notebooks actually have. There are a couple I've seen from ASUS and MSI that actually have integrated eSATA ports on them. I don't know if there are Express card or PCI card based eSATA adapters. I imagine there are at least a couple in existence. I also imagine that they're kind of specialized, maybe, because there's not a big demand for them.
I was going to say, like, I'm looking up Express card eSATA. So Express card, if you don't know it, it's that little slim 2/3 of a PC card slot. You see in a lot of MacBooks and some PC notebooks. eSATA 2 Express card on Amazon.com. And the truth is most notebooks don't have. Ooh, wow.
So you got to know what kind of Express card slot you have, a 3, 4, or 5, 4, 5, I think.
Yeah, most of them
have it.
just have the symbol one.
That's kind of expensive for just improving your backup performance necessarily.
This is the kind that most people who actually have one these days. I don't know if you can kind of see it there, but it's like, it's basically looks like a giant piece of chewing gum. Unfortunately, if you do not have, the USB 2.0 to eSATA makes no sense because it's just a USB adapter to it's an expensive USB to SATA adapter. Your notebook probably doesn't have USB 3.0. If you haven't bought, there seems to be some sort of more high-end notebooks that have eSATA or more business class notebooks have like eSATA and a VGA port because they're all business all the time. But if you don't have an Express card slot and you don't have an eSATA port built into the notebook, you are not going to use eSATA.
Not with that
as
machine.
An external connector. Yeah, I feel your pain, sir. I feel your pain. We've got an email from Kirby about SD card speed. It says, I recently washed and dried my wife's 8 gig SD8C card. I'm so sorry that she uses for a Canon Rebel XSI. Luckily, it survived, but I am erring on the side of caution and looking into a new SD8C card. I'm debating on whether to get a 15 megabit per second card or a 30 megabit per second card from SanDisk. While I am sure that I can... Is everyone okay back there? Or is the hardware creeping up on us? Something fell back there. And if you hear a terrible howl, it's the zombie hardware.
Nice.
Unfortunately, he says, I'm debating whether or not to get a 15 megabit per second card or a 30 megabit per second card from SanDisk. While I am sure I can easily see a difference in downloading pictures with a 30 megabit per second card, will it make a difference on the DSLR camera? Okay, SD card speeds are really weird. Compact Flash, the controller for Compact Flash is on the piece of memory itself. SD cards completely depend on the controller that are inside the device it is plugged into. So,
but they still have rated memory speeds, SD cards.
Yeah, well, SD card, it's funny.
Just from looking at the numbers, right? If he's talking about 15 megabytes per second and 30 megabytes per second, for a Canon Rebel XSI, I don't think that's gonna. That's not like a $3,000 professional camera that's going to try to record at 25 frames per second or something like that.
Yeah. Well, there's speed classes. There's Class 2, Class 4, Class 6, and Class 10.
Okay.
And then there's like the weird Class 1, which is for the UHS interface, which, you know, is basically high-end video cameras. But it's kind of funny because you look at this and there's SD video, you know, it's more about SD video recording. You know, Class 2 for SD video recording, Class 4 and 6 for full HD, Class 10 for full HD video recording, and HD still consecutive recording. So in theory, you're probably not going to need that. And then there's the UHS Class 1 stuff where you get the U instead of the C. You know, I think in terms of, it's kind of funny. I would double check just to make sure. Double check to make sure whatever card you have is rated. Yeah, Class 6 is plenty, absolutely. I don't think a Class 10 card is going to help in terms of downloading speed or the camera performance. It'd be curious. I haven't had also a chance to test that. So that would be kind of fun to try to do, you know, dump several gigabytes of data onto a Class 10 card and see if you could see any actual real-world performance.
Right. You know, you will notice that difference if you're copying it to your computer afterwards, right? So, I mean, depending on the card reader, if you're using a USB 2.0
believe that, but I have not verified it with real-world testings, I guess.
Our biggest, so like for our production video stuff at, back in Cincinnati and Kentucky area, that we use SD or compact flash rather. I'm sorry.
Right.
We use compact flash, and we're recording huge 1080p files. And one of the slowest steps in our production is copying the data from the SD card to our machine because we only have USB 2.0 memory card readers. So even if our flash memory can maybe read out at 30 megs a second, we're kind of limited to that like 10 to 11 rate because of the USB card slot. So if you have an integrated card slot in your laptop or your monitor that you use a lot, willing to bet that that's going to be USB 2.0, so you're kind of going to be limited by that anyway. And USB 3.0 card readers, though I saw a couple at Computex that I debated stealing, do not really kind of exist out in the wild very often yet. I would be glad to be proven wrong in that chat room or anybody listening, because we would love to have those.
That's funny. I'm looking in the Canon XSI settings because partially his real question was, will he see a performance different on the camera?
Right.
In terms of still picture taking, absolutely not. If you're trying to do full HD, possibly, but doubtful. It's interesting. Yeah.
We've had some issues where I had bought cheap compact flash memory. It was slow. And there's a little buffer on our Canon 7D logo. It fills up, and then the recording stops. Right, but it only happens sometimes. So I think we're right on the edge in the performance of our memory there. But we have since replaced all that. So you know, the XSI is a really nice camera, but it's not a you're not doing 5D Mark II or something like that, where you're gonna try to do 15 frame bursts type of thing. The camera doesn't have that capability.
So we'll say if you want to buy the fast memory card, by all means do it. Don't expect to see any difference in terms of the physical picture taking on the camera itself.
Correct. How about an email from Patrick, probably a different one, about Blu-ray on tablets. Says, love the show and all that goodness. I like it. He's to the point. I have an internal light-on Blu-ray ROM drive, but from a technical USB 2.0 speed and DRMical point, which from speed and DRM issues, would I be able to put that in an external drive box, hook it up to my tablet over USB, and be able to watch Blu-ray movies? I don't think so.
No. Well, it's the hardware actually isn't going to be the gating problem on this. It's going to be getting, first of all, connecting external drives.
HDCP is an issue.
Yeah, HDCP is an issue. Basically, first of all, your first issue is Blu-ray playback software for your tablet, which for the most part does not exist.
See, are you assuming? I was assuming a Windows tablet.
If it is a Windows 7 tablet, and it will, you know, if it's a Windows 7 tablet and it will run one of the Blu-ray playback applications, which there's like, you know, 3 or 4 to choose from, and the tablet actually supports a USB connection to a external drive, which is questionable. The real problem is there's 2 real problems here. Is one, will the software run on your tablet? If it's a Windows 7 tablet, the software might run on your tablet. It is doubtful that the CPU in your tablet has enough processing horsepower to decode the video on the Blu-ray.
It's possible.
Above and beyond the potential HDCP issues.
Right. There are HDCP issues. There are bandwidth issues over USB 2.0. Right. Although it should be enough. I mean, even the highest bit rates, Blu-ray movies should be able to do that. But you know, you're talking about how high of a percentage of utilization can you get. Right. I also question, why are you watching your Blu-ray movies on an external USB drive on a tablet? Are you taking this with you on trips?
You know, the truth is, if you want to watch your Blu-ray movies on a tablet, you should rip the movies off the Blu-ray into a nice, small, transportable format and store them on a nice, small external drive or on the tablet itself. But the DRM is going to be getting software that runs, having enough CPU horsepower on a tablet, and getting around potential HDCP issues are going to be your first. Those are your first 3 problems to solve in running Blu-ray on your tablet. Yeah. You know, if you happen to have like a Core i3 Blu-ray or Core i3 tablet with a USB port, you're a lot closer to solving this than you might be otherwise. We've should we do SSD power, monitor borders, or 28-inch?
I really want to hear about the 28-inch displays. So this was an email we got in from John, and he says, "Love the show. I occasionally hear Ryan sounding crestfallen when making suggestions on computer screens that are larger than 24, 26 inches, lamenting that 30-inch screens cost over $1,000. They do. They do. I would like to suggest the economical Hans and IINC, which apparently they're both made by Hans, 28-inch display with, get this, a 1920 by 1200 resolution.
Unfortunately, that actually is our problem with the majority of 27-inch monitors.
Yeah. Well, some of the 27, 28 inches have that resolution.
Some of them have the 2560
by 1440.
Right. Which is what we want.
Which is what you want, right?
Right. Or 25.
But he's saying this 28-inch display can be purchased for about $300 new.
That's impressive.
And about $200 to $250 refurbed. He's bought several of those screens for himself and family members, and they are massive and solid monitors. It's an interesting idea, right? If people aren't, if they're not, affected by maybe the larger than you might expect pixel size of a 28-inch screen with a 1920 by 1200 display, then I think if you just want larger stuff, that's fine. But you get into the whole question of why not get a 1080p 37-inch TV
at that point, and
it
move
might
it farther
be about the
away
same price, maybe a little bit more expensive, and then you can move a little bit further away from you, and you get the same. I guess the whole idea, right, is they want it closer to them. They want a bigger screen and close to you.
My problem is, let's see. I want the the Dell UltraSharp U3011, which, brace yourselves for the emotional trauma of the price if it launches.
It might.
Come on, computer, you can do it.
This is the new 30.
Yeah.
Yeah. Close and relaunch it. It's expensive. Let's put it that way. 1450, you guessing?
I'm guessing.
$1,500. I mean, it's.
The problem is actually we appreciate the suggestion. That's if you can find it, because Amazon's listing it as used only. But I really want the 2550. I want the high resolution 30-inch monitor.
Yeah.
I want the 4K 40-inch monitor, but it doesn't exist yet.
We can record at that, but we can't watch it at that. It was an interesting suggestion. I might, I'd be curious to try one out for a little while and see.
And that's so close to a 1080p 32-inch display, and I already know a 1080p 32-inch display. The pixels are, it's not if it's sitting across. I got a buddy who's a contractor, and he actually ended up with a 32-inch television that's on the other side of his room. Yeah, and he uses that as his computer monitor. Which for him, he went from basically a 17-inch 10x7 monitor to a faster computer, with a 1080p monitor on the other side of the room, and he's really happy because his desk is clear, and
he sees that as an improvement.
And it is an improvement in that case. The problem is, I want a 27 or 30-inch flat panel with a higher resolution. I do. It's good to hear that Hans is making those monitors. Dylan writes in about split audio output. He says, I found out by accident the free/open source home theater PC software Boxy, if configured correctly, will display full screen and output its own audio on my TV while permitting my PC display to show my desktop and allow PC audio to play back through my computer speakers. I love Boxy, but must admit the DVD playback is a bit wonky in the PC version. Really wish they would update it. It's several versions behind the Boxy box code. Hope this helps last week's listener.
We had several emails and suggestions about that problem. Is how do you get output of maybe a DVD playback to one TV and then be able to play a game on it? The machine has more than enough power to do that.
Right.
Computational horsepower. How do you do that? I thought we had another kind of note in here too, but other people were saying that Windows Vista actually allowed you to do that much easier, to lock outputs and then launch other applications and change those outputs. I really think from most of the emails we've got in that it really comes down to if your application, your specific application that you're using, has the capability to specify an output, other than just using Windows default. You know, which
like when you go into
if you go into the settings, right, and you see, yeah, you can show them on maybe on the Mac what you get with that, but it all, you know, maybe if you go into Windows Control Panel, right, you'll see all your different output options. So what capabilities do you have there, and can your individual application actually set that? And some of the people are saying Windows Vista locked those in better than Windows 7 does, though there are ways to work around it. So it sounds like, you know, updated driver control models, updated usability type things that Windows 7 did, right? You know, they don't want audio to be incorrectly.
I was going to say, ideally, as Skype slowly launches on my system, ideally your application would have something. Sorry, the new Skype interface has been driving me nuts ever since they changed it. Ideally, your application would have something like the audio video settings in Skype where you can choose which input. You know, normally I would have an external microphone and an external net cam and an external headset. All kinds
of stuff hooked up.
But they can actually, in this case, you can actually specify it from the application. That would be ideal. The problem is most applications don't actually have that functionality.
Some games do, like I think Valve games do, but other games don't. You know, it all depends on a bunch of different things. So hopefully some of those ideas will fix out. Boxy is one of those. So if you want to if you want to change what your software is to do your DVD playing out to the TV, it sounds like Boxy will do that with maybe a couple of issues, but it should be able to play back and allow you to play games. You can appease your wife and kid with the movie they want to watch, and you can still sit in the other room and play games.
That's the spirit.
That's what you got to do.
Appeasement. Speaking of which, email from Kent about monitor calibration. I don't know what this has to do with appeasement. It says, I recently bought an inexpensive Samsung 23-inch 1080p HD TV for use as a computer monitor. Do you have any inexpensive tips or tools you can recommend to help me calibrate this display? I use it almost exclusively for gaming, no web browsing or document content creation, so color accuracy is more of a nice-to-have than a necessity. Pixar discs have a pretty nice basic HDTV calibration tool built into it. So if you want to, you can load, you know, get a copy of The Incredibles, dig through the menu system, find the calibration tool. It's built into the Pixar disc, and use that to calibrate the output from your computer to the HDTV. That's one cheap way to do it. Or you can get serious with your calibration tools.
You don't have to get too serious. Yeah, I think I've recommended this a few times. It's a device from a company called Pantone, who is they're really known for their color.
Pantone colors.
Yeah, there you go. Right? So
you can buy a book with all of the all the color chart, all the colors you can print or create. They basically have numerical values for them for standardized. Look, a Pantone.
So they know color.
Pantone chips.
They know color. So the Pantone Huey Pro is a device that's going to cost you. I'm looking on Amazon now. It's $69.99.
Cheap.
So it's relatively inexpensive for a type of device that does this. And what it does, it's a USB device. You hook up to your computer and you run an application on your monitor, and the application outputs a series of colors, you know, white, green, yellow, red, all the different shades of gray, and then when it's done with all that, it creates a color control profile.
Cool.
And it sets it to Windows. And it has suction cups on the bottom of the device, so you stick it to your monitor screen, and it has a little camera on it that basically reads the colors that are coming off of the LCD. So that's how it's getting real-world kind of results and updates there. And that's also helpful for people that have multiple monitors and you hate the fact that the two monitors have different colors when you drag a window across them. You run this application and this tool on both displays and they'll be matched now. Yes. And you'd be surprised, I was very surprised when I first bought the device, how overblown my whites were,
right.
how blue everything looked. You know, after you see a corrected one, you might think it looks bad, actually.
Well,
use it for a week and then go back to what you had before and all of a sudden, you know, you realize that lower light is better. You know, we get into that issue with the TVs. I know
right.
you do with Robert.
Well,
so.
Robert Heron and I have talked about this a bunch of times on HT Nation, on Techzilla. It's basically monitors come out of the box designed to pop. And when I say pop, that means they're bluish, they're super white, they are brighter than they should be because they're designed to stand out in a rack of monitors at a big box store.
Right.
And so normally a monitor is way too bright, especially for NTSC. And the first time you see a properly calibrated, like this is kind of the actual spec for a monitor, three things are going to happen. You're going to be like, wow, this is a little dark. Wow, this is a lot darker than I expected. And then you'll be like, wow, all of these colors that have previously been blown out in detail in the brighter sections and darker sections of the monitor are actually going to be there when you're not used to them actually being there. And your blacks will actually look black instead of gray. But it does take some adjustment sometimes. But I think it's worth it, and I think it's also can be shocking, especially if you're running a multiple monitor desktop, at how radically different the same image can look on two different monitors if you don't properly calibrate
I've
them.
had that Huey Pro device for probably 6 years, right? And every time I get a new display or I reinstall the OS, I run it, and it actually has a pretty cool feature it sits on a little stand on your desk, and it reads ambient light.
Oh, cool.
And every 60 seconds, it'll read the ambient light, and it'll adjust the brightness of your displays accordingly.
So as long as the clouds aren't going by intermittently, you're in good shape.
Yes, it will adjust for that though. So I mean, I would I'd test it. I would tell it to run it with all the overhead lights on, and I turn all the overhead lights off, and it comes down and doesn't blow out your eye socket.
I was just thinking it was like somebody walking by at an appropriate time right before.
Right as it reads.
Yeah.
It could. That could happen, I guess.
Is my
Maybe you
monitor
could set
so
that
dark?
to a much higher testing rate.
One last question before we go. Michael has a question about SSD caching selection. He says, I am still languishing over my high-end PC build, which brings me to my next question. I'm getting a Z68 motherboard so I can use the SSD caching feature with a 1.5 terabyte standard hard drive that uses SATA 3. Right now on Newegg, the Intel 320 40 gig SATA 2 and the OCZ Agility 360 gig SATA 3 are both $99. I want to know if I will see a speed difference in my SSD caching using the SATA 2 versus the SATA 3. Why would you? Well, yeah. Okay, Intel should be more reliable, but a 60 gigabyte SATA 3 drive versus a 40 gigabyte SATA 2 drive.
Yeah, so he's using it for SSD caching, though.
Yes. He says, will I have compatibility problems if I have one drive that uses SATA 3 and another that uses SATA 2?
No.
He says, I've also heard the Agility 3 is far less reliable than other SSDs due to its budget NAND chips. Any thoughts on stability?
I don't think it has anything to do with the budget NAND chips necessarily. If there's any kind of issues, it might be on the controller side, but I'd say it's pretty minimal. And again, if he's using this as an SSD caching drive, if the drive dies, you RMA it. Right. Your system runs a little bit slower for a little bit. You get the new drive back, you plug it in, and you're all right, right? So you don't have to worry about losing critical data necessarily.
Right.
So maybe that's a little bit of pressure off of you.
So are we talking about a drive that plugs into the motherboard?
No, just I mean, just for the Intel SRT technology, you can just use any SATA SSD for the SSD cache to create that kind of like hybrid hard drive solution. It kind of makes, you're kind of right, it's like if you can get a SATA 6 gig with 20 gigs more capacity for the same price, it kind of makes sense to get that. Now I know Intel, it will support up to 64 gigs of SSD for the caching technology, I believe. But once you get above like 30, it really starts to have the diminishing returns.
So SATA 2 versus SATA 3, is there going to be a notable?
I don't think you're going to see a performance difference really. Especially for the caching, because what it's caching is it's caching small, quick, often access files. So you're not going to cache sustained, several hundred meg files that you're copying from drive to drive. This is what you would get the benefit from a SATA 3 to a SATA 6. G product.
So if you want
latency is much more important.
So performance isn't going to be much of a difference if you want to air to, unless there's a huge discrepancy in the latency between the two drives you're looking at.
Right.
You know, roll with the Intel if you want to air towards reliability, and if you want the extra capacity, even though it may not be particularly useful in this application, you know, you shouldn't be too nervous about getting the OCZ agility.
I would. That's correct. Because and it maybe if you think you're gonna use that drive for something else later,
Right.
then you're gonna want that extra 20 gig.
Recycle it into the kitchen computer.
Exactly. You know, you're, oh, I bought a new laptop. They came out with a new Cherryville SLC. I'm going to use as my SSD cache. You can take a 60 gig drive out and use it for something else. You get a little capacity bonus there.
There you have it. Ladies and gentlemen, we want to thank you as always for watching Twitch This Week in Computer Hardware. I'm Patrick Norton. Actually, what's coming up on PC Perb? Once you're recovered from IDF?
Wow. So we do have a lot of recovery work. There's still a lot of stuff that I need to write up at IDF. A lot of information, architectural information about Ivy Bridge that I haven't kind of written down and discussed yet. That will all be coming up this week. And I think we have a couple, at least another cell phone and another notebook review pending as well. So no Ultrabooks yet. Trying hard to get those though.
You want an Ultrabook so bad.
I want to see if it lives up to the claims, right? I need more battery life, and
you want the skinny shiny.
You saw the pictures, right? I put it on top of this Lenovo machine, and it was like a little baby laptop. So I thought I had the thin and light.
You thought you had it. Well, you did. It's just thinner and lighter now. It's just that's the fat and heavy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's the fat and heavy, thin and light.
This is just working with hardware is just painful.
How about on Techzilla, HD Nation?
Roger built his Hackintosh and installed OS 10 today. So next Wednesday we're going to be doing the Hackintosh episode. We got new Plasma from Samsung coming up on HD Nation. We've got
those are very popular now.
Actually, and on Monday we're going to be talking a bunch more about Windows 8. So if you've got some Windows 8 questions, do me a favor, fire them out to me at Patrick Norton on the Twitter, or well, you can find me on Twitter. Ryan Shrout being your
at Ryan Shrout. We are creatively named on Twitter. Yes. And don't forget your emails into us, Twich, TWICH, at twit.tv. We love all your questions. We love to read them and answer them as many as we can.
We try.
So we appreciate that.
That's it for this edition of Twitch This Week in Computer Hardware. I'm Patrick Norton.
I'm Ryan Shrout.
We'll see you next week.
So you wanted to see the back of it. I don't know exactly what to see. You can see there, it's a large back plate and traces and stuff. Yes, I would do that to a working motherboard. You don't know how I work in the labs. I see so many motherboards. If I had to treat them all delicately,
you'd just lose your mind.
Yeah. Intel was giving out what are they? The wristbands, the anti-static wristbands that you attach. And I was like, are you serious?
It's kind of funny if you got a group of PC hardware enthusiasts or testers, well, professional, I would say testers, you would find like 1 in maybe 12 that actually use an anti-static strap and board. I miss the atomic clock. Don't we all?
Plus minus buttons.
Yeah.
A power button, but no reset button. And OC genies.
I still think that tiny little jumper on the far side of the chipset cooler is the is the reset jumper, just to be cruel. But yeah, it's not so much that familiarity breeds contempt, but the but you start to realize just exactly how bomb-proof most computer components are once you've been living it with them 40 or 60 or 80 hours a week for several years of your life.
I get a lot of my family members that want me to or friends of family and that kind of stuff. It's like, hey, can you help me fix this computer problem? And I go, nope. And they're like, well, what do you mean? And it's like, I don't fix computers anymore. If a computer doesn't work, I throw it to the side and I go work on something else. Like, I don't fix PCs anymore. Like if I'm doing testing and I have a software bug, format or new hard drive or something like that, right? It just I don't deal with any of that anymore. That's the benefit of not being
data.